Attention Big Blue Nation. Welcome to Kentucky Basketball Then and Now, a unique exploration of America's paramount collegiate hardwood program, featuring anecdotes and memories from the 1950s forward to the very latest on everything UK hoops. Kentucky Basketball Then and Now seats Wildcat fans front court and center. Here's Lexington native and SEC standout Gary Waddell and Owensboro native and Rough Front senior student manager Mike Harreld.
Hello and welcome again to our podcast, Kentucky Basketball Then and Now. Again, I'm Gary Waddell. Mike Harreld, my co-host, is in the car. He won't be able to join us in person today. And then Tom Gray, who Mike mentioned in our first podcast, is with us. Tom is the gentleman who can come up with more stats and look at stats and do more with them than anybody I've ever seen. So he's going to share some of that, and he's followed recruiting for UK since what, Tom, 67, 66 or something like that?
1967, when you and I first met, is what got my attention. I first started following recruiting when Cincinnati missed out on a big recruit they had in 1965. So I got involved in 1965. I followed the 1966 recruiting class, Issel, Pratt, and Casey, those guys.
Yep.
I really got into it. It's one of my two hobbies, that and saltwater fishing. That's probably two of the strangest hobbies any man ever had.
Well,
recruiting is one of them.
Let's talk a little recruiting. As you and I spoke a day or two ago, recruiting then looks like nothing now. It's totally different. There's probably numerous more magazines or social media and so forth. And as I recall, back 66 or so, there was only one national magazine that was Parade, or only one list of high school All-Americans, and that was Parade. Am I correct there?
There's another one called Scholastic Coach that came out after the season. There were a couple that came out before the season. Street and Smith, Basketball Yearbook, Coach and Athlete, all three came out before the season. Mm-hmm. And they listed 100 players who might be good. So I wouldn't call that a true high school All-American team, but Scholastic Coach listed 40 players that they considered All-Americans, and Parade listed 30. Parade goes back to the 50s. So does Scholastic Coach.
You were telling me the one that listed 100 players didn't include Louis Dampier.
Yeah.
Which is hard to believe.
It is amazing. I happen to have the 1963 list for that. It listed Pat Riley, did not list Louis Dampier. I can't imagine there were 100 high school players better than Louis Dampier in 1963. But
and it's not like he was playing in Hawaii or Alaska. He was in the heartbeat of high school basketball right outside Indianapolis. So,
yeah, he was the leading scorer in Indiana points per game that year. Brad Bounds was the leading scorer in total points, but Dampier was the leading scorer in Indiana for points per game. So it wasn't always a secret. They certainly should have known about him. How they missed him, I don't know.
Yeah. That is exactly right. You had told me the 70 team was one that you thought could go all the way and didn't. Of course, 3 or 4 years there, the NCAA tournament did not treat UK well. They lost at home to Ohio State, Issel, Casey, and Pratt's sophomore year, and that was actually played at Memorial Coliseum when you could play on your home court. That's when college basketball wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. And then the next year, I guess Jacksonville beat them.
No, the next year Marquette beat
Marquette, them. Okay. And then after that was Jacksonville. That was the Rainy Night in Georgia. That's Brooke Benton's song was popular then, but UK and Athens didn't do very well. I guess Marquette beat them by 24. And then the consolation game, they got beat by 18. So,
I forget who they played, but they lost both games that year.
Yeah.
And when you play in the NCAA, when you played then, you didn't have any cupcake for a first or second round.
No, there's only 24 teams, as you well know.
That's right. You had to win your conference to even get in the tournament.
Yep. And usually it came down to Kentucky or Tennessee, the last game of the season, to who was going to represent the conference. And UK came out every time. They won some tough games against Tennessee, some in Knoxville and some in Lexington to get to the NCAA, but they didn't do very well in the tournament. The Von Wedeking stepping in front of Issel at midcourt was terrible because UK, I think, would have gone on and done some damage in the tournament, and Jacksonville beat them. Of course, Jacksonville had Artis Gilmore, Von Wedeking. They had another 6'10" guy, so it wasn't like Jacksonville wasn't very good, but
yes, they were good. I watched that game. Yeah, they were excellent.
Yeah, and
they had a 7-footer named Pembroke Burrows.
Yes. That's what I'm thinking.
Their ace scorer was a guy named Rex Morgan.
Yep.
Out of Southern Illinois.
Yep.
They had very good. They were the number 4 rated team in the country.
Yeah, they weren't chopped liver. They were pretty good. I played against Pembroke. He went to junior college way down South Florida. And I played against him my freshman year, and then the next year he's playing with Artis Gilmore at JU, and so they were good. Their coach wore the white suit. That was his trademark.
Right?
Yes, and white coat and white pants. He was quite a character. So, well, what do you think happened in there? I mean, we don't know, but it's like the team completely changed once it got into the tournament. They had good regular seasons in all 3 years. Of course, we know one year Casey got hurt, which hurt him badly, and then he came back the next year after rehab for a year. But they certainly had the talent with the big three, Casey, Issel, and Pratt, and then had some other talent. That class they were in brought in, 11 people, 11 recruits?
12 if you count Labe. 11.
Yeah.
11 recruits out of the 66 high school class. Another fellow who was a walk-on, but he was an academic scholarship, Waylon Long.
Oh, yeah.
Barron County.
Yep.
He actually played UK varsity and transferred to Chattanooga.
Swanee, yeah.
If you want to count Labe and Long, they had 13 players. As you know, Gary, back then you could have 25 players on scholarship.
Yeah.
And Kentucky lost most of its players from the 1965 class, all but Argento. Went somewhere else or flunked out, this or that. So they only had one coming in from that 65 class. So they had 4 or 5 extra scholarships. And Joe Hall,
65 was not a good recruiting year for Kentucky at all.
No, it didn't pan out. Those guys had some talent. They missed out on Butch Beard, but they had some talent, but they just never developed. That guy from New York, Jerry Gooder, was not nearly as good as the press clippings.
Yeah, I remember Rowley telling me that summer that he wouldn't be around long. They would get rid of him, and which could mean planting beer in his refrigerator, or if they wanted somebody out, UK didn't pull him punches. They got him on suspension or something. I think is what they used to do, and those scholarships were precious. But of course, that's when you had a freshman team, so you had to have a lot of scholarships to play. We talked also about Art Labe, who 6'10" or 11 guy, very nice guy out of California. I think he just showed up at the basketball offices one day and said, I'm looking for a home. I played junior college, and so they gave him a scholarship. And was a pretty good player. Played behind Issel, of course, left-hander. And what was funny about him, he drove all the way across the country in a Volkswagen Beetle, which, of course, was a very popular car. Many college students had that. It was cheap and good gas efficiency, but how he fit in that, I don't know. So a lot of people were amazed when they heard that he was not only could fit in a Beetle, but drove how many hours it would be from California to Lexington. But that was funny. That was funny. Then the next class, I guess it was, we got Mark Soderberg from Huntington Beach. Now he was recruited pretty hard, and he stayed for 2 or 3 years, and then couldn't beat out Tom Payne, and he transferred to Utah. And I think ending up had a pretty good career out there. But I remember him because he could sure get off the ground for a guy that tall, and was thin, but he was. I remember when they would have the games prior to formal practice starting, after they did the running program. Soderberg didn't want to play if Payne was there because he didn't want to show off his moves to Payne. He wanted to save him to regular practice so the coaches would see those, and and so forth. And I don't know that philosophy probably didn't work very well because you got a teammate, you're going to play against them at some point, especially another big guy like you. They're going to meet in practice at some point. He put that off. But
hey, Gary, one strange but true fact about Mark Soderberg is he played in high school for Lute Olson.
Oh.
Lute Olson was his coach at Marina High School. And then, of course, he played college ball for Adolph Rupp. So I bet he's the one and only basketball player who played for two legendary Hall of Fame coaches.
Boy, that is something.
Olson
Olson was at, I don't know where he started, but he was at Iowa before he went to Arizona. And he gave Kentucky fits, obviously, in Arizona. And Kentucky made him a lot of money. His agents would just throw out, if you don't give him a contract, he's going to leave here. And he thought about Kentucky because that's when Joe left and then somebody else. But he used that as leverage, as all good agents and coaches do. If you don't pay me, I got other schools that want me. And Lute Olson was made a lot of money by UK. Remember, I'd forgotten that he had coached him. I think I knew that, but I had forgotten all about that.
Yeah, Olson went to a junior college, and then he went to Long Beach State, and from there to Iowa, and from there to Arizona, where he really found his niche.
Yeah, Long Beach got its fame primarily when the Tarkanian went there.
That's for sure.
Coached them well, and I guess he went from Long Beach to UNLV, and had a good career there, and won the championship one year, and then Duke beat them the next year when they were a pretty heavy favorite. The same Duke team they had beaten the year before by about 30, I think, in Denver. Duke came back in a great game. Duke had added Grant Hill, which is a pretty good addition, and that was a great game. And then beat UNLV there. UNLV still had Larry Johnson and all the other guys again that had beaten Duke the year before.
Gary, you and I talked on the phone this week about, in my opinion, the 1970 UK team is one of the underrated teams of all time among Wildcat basketball lore. That team is one of only 7 that finished number 1 in the final polls, AP and UPI, among all the great teams of Kentucky. And as you and I talked, 1996 finished second in both polls, even though it may have been a better team. But 51, 52, 66, 70, let's see who else, 78, 2012, and 2015. Those are the only UK teams to finish the season. Now, polls don't matter. It's the championship that matters. Those are only 7 UK teams to finish number 1 in both final polls. UPI. And polls just started in about 1949. So the 70 team, people don't even think of how good that team was because they lost to Jacksonville. They had to finish the game with Issa on the bench, Pratt on the bench, and Terry Mills on the bench. That was their 3 leading scorers. And they all had fouled out with 7 or 8 minutes to go in the game. So they finished not only the 7 or 8 minutes, but the overtime, and they hung right next to Jacksonville. The guys off the bench held their own.
Yeah, I remember a high-scoring game, like 106 to 100 or something like that.
Yeah.
Very high-scoring game. Was Larry Steele on that team? Larry was a year behind Issel, Casey, and Pratt. So
he was a starter until he got injured mid-year, and then Tom Parker became the starter. But Steele still played actually more minutes than Parker. And Steele was a heck of a player.
Oh, yeah. He, especially defensively, hustle, and pretty good rebounder, too. And I guess those are the attributes that helped him play 12 years or so in the NBA. Played on the championship team with Walton in 76, I guess it was, which was quite a team. Upset the Dr. J and the Sixers in the finals. But that was quite a team. Yeah,
Larry Steele. In fact, my 2 personal favorite UK players over the years were Mike Casey and Larry Steele. I was not a basketball player except in the side yard, but I patterned my shooting style after Larry Steele from the wrong side of his head. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And Casey used to bank it. So that was my shooting style. Wrong side of my head, bank shot.
You had a good comment, Risley, because I said, unfortunately for Mike, he was half step slow. And you said, in running, but he was quick. and that's probably true. But he came back the next year and averaged 16 points, I think, after the leg injury.
Yeah, he had a fine year in 1971.
Yeah.
He never recovered that quick step, though. He lost that injury, cost him that quick step.
Yeah.
It probably cost him a pretty good career in pro basketball, too.
Yeah, he was, I know, a great high school player. The East-West games I mentioned in the first podcast were held in Lexington, and I'd go down and watch him practice, and he was so much better than any other player in Kentucky then. And that's when Kentucky was producing certainly more good players than they are now. And I don't know what happened to all the good Kentucky players, Unsels and Jim McDaniels, those guys don't seem they're producing them like they did. That's a good question. Why?
The life of me, I don't know. Maybe they play another sport because there's still talent. There's still athletic talent in Kentucky. Maybe they play football instead. But Unseld was close to, if not the number one recruit in the nation.
Yep.
McDaniel certainly was the number one recruit in the nation. Tom Paine was close to the number one. I mean, Kentucky produced the best of anywhere except maybe Indiana.
Yep.
Back in the 60s.
And not to mention Clem Haskins in early 63, I think it was.
Yeah, 63.
Yeah, who had a good career at Western and went on to have a good NBA career and then coached in the NBA.
Yeah.
He was tough.
I would like to see him as a Wildcat, but it wasn't to be.
Well, we got his brother.
got
Marion, who played some at Kentucky. Obviously wasn't as good as Clem, but he was a pretty good player. Recruiting-wise, going back, so the two recruiting classes you think are the best UK ever had are Issel, Casey and Pratt, and then would you put the recruits that won the championship, Davis and those guys?
1974, Givens, Lee, Roby.
Okay.
That's the ones I would put. I look at results rather than ratings.
Yeah.
The 66 team was rated the number one recruiting class in the country, the freshman team.
Yeah.
And they had good results, but the 74 recruits had even better results. They were runner-up in NCAA as freshmen. They won the NIT when it meant something as sophomores.
Yeah, in the team with Davis had Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, who was second draft choice in the NBA right behind the Brow, and who had some other good players in it. That was quite a team. They ended up winning the championship. But
that class had 5 high school All-Americans. And in the modern way of recruiting, I'd probably say that 2012 is the best class, certainly that Calipari had signed.
Yeah.
Probably the best.
You say that his first one was Wall, and those guys weren't too bad either.
They're nipping at their heels, that's for sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that class didn't have a good outside shooter, or they would have beaten West Virginia and made it to the Final Four. That was a disappointing loss because I think they only lost once or twice the regular season. And
they were 35-3 on the season.
35-3, okay. But lost to West Virginia, Huggins of all people. And he put his own up, and nobody could shoot. Wall, of course, wasn't a real good outside shooter. And Jerron Lamb was on that team, though. No, he's later. He was later. Never mind.
A year later.
Yeah, he was on the championship team.
I think Darius Miller was on that team.
Yeah, he was. He was a holdover from Gillespie and had a pretty good year. As he was the one experienced guy they had that started and played. I'm sure that was like heaven to him after playing for Gillespie to play on a good team with a good coach. And so his career ended pretty good, I guess, his senior year.
We talked about recruiting, Gary, and how it was different back in the day. Well, UK didn't even scout players until their senior year, and usually it would be they would go to the state tournament in the surrounding states or in Kentucky and look over who they thought were the best players. And that's one reason why Thad Jarrett was recruited by UK. He had a good state tournament in 1964, and Adolph Rupp said, "I want that guy."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who was the assistant.
Well, would have been Lancaster, I guess.
Yeah, Lancaster.
Or T.L. Plain, one of those guys.
Neil Reed, I think it was back in 60.
Neil Reed, yeah.
And they said, well, he's not rated as highly as these other guys. He said, I don't care. I can teach that boy to play some fast break basketball. So
you're right.
They didn't even scout players. Nowadays, they scout them as freshmen and sophomores and see them in summer tournaments. In those days, they didn't even make any contact with people until the spring of their senior year. And most scholarships weren't signed till May, June, or July.
There's one coach that was exception to that, was Lefty Driesell.
Oh, yeah.
And he was notorious for sending letters out in a player's sophomore year. And I remember going to Georgetown basketball camp, which I think was the very first in the country. Bob Davis came up with that idea. He had a lot of good players at it, but talking to other guys, first letter they ever got was from Lefty Driesell. And Lefty recruited some great guys too, Davison, with Hetzel and Snyder and, the guy that was on the cover with Casey in the Sports Illustrated, Mike Malloy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
they had really, really good players at Davidson. They were a good team. I don't know that they did much in the NCAA, but
they had to get through North Carolina. And Charlie Scott hit a shot at the buzzer, which was a great game. And I mean, at the buzzer to beat them one year in the tournament. And that was the first of Charlie Scott's fame. And he came in from a junior college there in North Carolina, as I remember.
Yeah, Laurinburg Institute.
Yeah.
He was from New York City originally.
Yeah.
But they brought him down and sent him to Laurinburg Institute. Laurinburg put out some good players over the years back then. I don't know if they still are around today.
Scott lived in Atlanta for maybe still lives in Atlanta, but he was in Atlanta, in the mid-'80s, something like that. And his kid played in a little, I don't know what you call it, elementary school league that had referees and like a real game. And I remember Scott, he wasn't coaching the other team, but he was up in the stands. He got frustrated at the referee and came down on the floor. And his kid was probably 9 years old. I mean, kind of what you hear fights in a little league. That's kind of what he did. Didn't get in the fight, but he kind of made what's a polite word? A nuisance out of himself, I'll put it that way, at this one game anyway at Chastain Park here in Atlanta.
Yeah. Another thing we talked about on the phone earlier this week is the 1970 team had 9 high school All-Americans, if you count Casey. Casey didn't play that year, but he was still on the roster as a redshirt.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't realize that in the latter years of Rupp, starting in 66 until he left in 71 or 72, he recruited pretty darn well thanks to Joe Hall.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Recruiting was in the tank until Joe arrived, and he was tenacious. I'm not sure what his secret sauce was, but it immediately improved, especially when he got Issel, Casey, and Pratt. Casey was easy, but Issel was, I guess, going to Wisconsin, and Joe turned him around from that to go to UK. And as you said, public knowledge, Issel wasn't Joe's first choice for center at UK. George Janke, who went to Dayton, was who they really wanted, and missed out on him. And he had an average career, but UK certainly did much better with Issel. I mean, that goes without saying. I
think it worked both ways. I think Issel became a lot better player because he went to UK and got opportunities to be coached by Adolph, and Adolph had connections in the pros and that sort of stuff. If he had gone to Wisconsin, who was coached by John Powless back then, or Northwestern, it's a different Dan Issel.
Yeah.
Now, he wound up with a career, but I think the fact that he came to Kentucky made his career that much better.
All right. And he met his wife at UK.
He did?
Sherry Hughes, who was a neighbor just up the street from me, a cheerleader. Interesting story there. The team came in late one night from a road trip, two or so in the morning, and so they had the girlfriends out there to meet him and so forth, which happens. And so Sherry asked Dan if he would like a ride back to campus, and he said yes, and that kind of started right there. And,
that's this history, huh?
Yeah, she picked him out, I think, and they've been married for, 50 years thereabouts. And I knew her. She was 2 years older than me, but I knew her sister better, who was a year younger than me. But they were
couple
nice.
Points on Issel. He was part of the first UK team I ever saw play in person. That would have been the Wild Kittens in 1967 when they played the Cincinnati Bear Kittens. Issel was the leading scorer that day, and Joe Hall coached and all of that stuff. And then I later had the pleasure of meeting Dan and Sherry at the first Arlington Million, I'm not bashful, as you already know. So I walked up to him and said, "Hi, Dan and Mrs. Issel. I'm so-and-so from Kentucky, and I'm a big fan of yours. And I first saw you play on against Cincinnati, and I knew the date and all that stuff." And Sherry's just shaking her head. She says, "Another Kentucky fan."
We want him to be a guest on the show. I may have to go through Sherry to do that, but he would be a great guest. Obviously, everybody out there listening knows the name of Dan Issel. Dan thought that his record would never be broken because of the one and dones. But now with the NIL, with some guys staying 2-3 years, there's a chance that somebody may break his record.
Yeah, could be. A couple guys have gotten close. I guess Kenny Walker's still number 2. Huh?
Yeah. And Cotton Nash is 3, I think.
I think Bogans might have got ahead of him.
Okay. Of course, those guys played 4 years, and Issel and Cotton Nash played 3. And a lot of people forget that. Of course, a lot of people weren't even born then, but that changed things quite a bit. They got an extra year to play on the varsity, and took advantage of it.
Yeah, a friend of mine who played as a walk-on the 1965-66 freshman raised a point with me by email a couple times that Kentucky had a strange recruiting habit of having a really good class and then a so-so class and a really good class. So they alternated. Like 65 was a so-so class, 66 was a great class, 67 was just so-so. It didn't wind up too good.
Well, there's, I think, a good reason for that. If the class they had was good and they were playing as sophomores, guys knew they weren't going to play initially, so they went to schools that they knew they could play. So I'm sure that was a big part of that.
One of the things the coaches would do also is they would look at a school's recruiting year, and then they would decide whether they wanted to schedule them or not. Coach Rupp used to have meetings with Coach Langster and some of the assistants about who they could fill in for some of their games that weren't going to be fearsome. I mean, they would be good, but so he always believed in scheduling was an important part of coaching.
Adolph never missed a beat, did he? He was, and that's when he was, 60 years old or so. When you were his manager, he must have been something when he was 35, 40 years old.
Yeah, most focused person I have ever known.
Mm-hmm.
All he wanted to do was figure out a way to have one more point than you when the game was over. And he had another, it was kind of a weakness, but actually he turned it into a strength. He was a little bit paranoid. He was scared to death that somebody else would come up with something that would push them ahead of him. And so he was constantly asking everybody, what do you think? And what are they going to do? And what's the next item? And so he was constantly trying to stay ahead. And he was wide open for changes, even though, you remember when we went to the 1-3-1 zone, he told him it really wasn't a zone. It was a trapping hyperboloid man-to-man. But he was very interested in whatever was going on and wanted to stay ahead of everybody else if he possibly could.
There are 2 coaches that have winning records in playing another game. There's probably maybe a coach that was 1-0 against him, but 2 coaches he couldn't beat was Dean Smith. I think Dean had like a 17-8 record, maybe something like that against Adolph. And that North Carolina beating UK has continued for the most part since then. And the other was Ray Mears. Mears had a winning record against Adolph. Mears was like, you talk about intense, Ray Mears was more intense than Adolph was, which I guess why he had some mental problems, but he was very intense also. Mears was the only guy I've ever known when I went for a recruiting trip to Tennessee, and they took me out to Lake, and when you're recruiting, they don't introduce you to the malcontents. It's only the guys that are playing and they think happy. But went out to Lakeland, that big lake outside Knoxville, and first thing he did, we got in the car, was put on driving gloves. And I've never been in a car where the driver had to have driving gloves. That was his thing, I guess. And that was more. We're getting off of Ray Mears here, but
Gary, I got a couple Adolph Rupp stories that I don't know first, but I do second. First is the brown suit.
Yeah.
You may not know this, but he wore a brown suit at a game back in the 30s or 40s. Team upset a team that they thought they would lose to, and so he thought the brown suit was lucky. But next game, he wore a blue suit, and they lost to a team they were supposed to beat. And Adolph says, "I'm going back to the brown suit." And from that day on, he bought enough brown suits that he wore a brown suit to coach every game at UK, strictly because of that one win and loss. And the other story is the bobby pin story.
Yeah. Good luck, bobby pin.
Yeah, he found a bobby pin before a game one time, and they won that game too. And he figured that was a good luck charm. So every game after that, he went looking for a bobby pin. Well, UK actually strategically had a manager who would drop bobby pins all over the floor. And Adolph would be sure to find one, and by golly, more often than not, he would win.
Yeah, so I heard they were planted, and that doesn't,
unlike any other, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I can't think. One thing, this is off recruiting, but in watching Midnight Madness the other day, I hope Cal calms down the dunking over three guys, which is what Damian Collins did. I mean, you're just inviting an injury there, I think. And he tripped a little bit the first time he went over. But, I mean, that guy, of course, he's 18 years old and wants to show off. I don't blame him, but those legs are going to be worth millions of dollars here in a couple of years. And would hate to see him get hurt. I guess that's the last time we'll see that over three players, but maybe he'll do that in the pros if he enters the dunking contest at an all-star game. But I held my breath on that one. And of course, not Lance Ware, but our other forward did the same thing. I think he only had two people and to jump over, not three like Collins did. So
I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name too. His brother plays in the NBA.
Toppin.
Jacob Toppin is our guy. Yeah,
we're getting old a little bit, I think, Tom.
Yeah, I think so. They had pro day and they took their true measurements. Jacob only measured 6'7.5", and he's listed at 6'9". I imagine that's barefooted, and in shoes he probably is 6'9" or close to it. But as far as I'm concerned, Jacob's a heck of a player. He's in the DNA of the Toppin family that they developed maybe late or something like that.
I mentioned that earlier, that this is right the time that Obi nobody had heard of Obi's second year there at Dayton. Third year, he ended up being player of the year. And Dayton came out of nowhere had a great year that year. And maybe you talk to a Dayton fan. I've got a client here who is confident they would have made the Final Four. That was a COVID year, but when everything stopped and no tournament, and they very well may have. They had a good team.
They had one of the best teams. This is going to drag you back to 1968. Do you happen to know who's considered the best high school player in your high school graduating class? Julius
basketball. Oh, well, Dirk Mendenville wasn't there yet.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean nationwide. Julius Erving was the best player in the high school class of 68.
Roosevelt High School. Yep.
But he didn't make All-American. He wasn't on either All-American team. He didn't make All-State. He didn't even make All-City. He made All-Conference twice.
Yep.
Because he was a small school and nobody heard of him. And in those days, nobody heard of him until he played and averaged 20 points and 20 rebounds each year at UMass. And then they figured out how good he was. But Julius Erving was completely overlooked by the high school recruiters and so forth. He had two offers in high school. St. John's as a favor to his high school coach, and UMass, which is where Pitino was at the time as a coach. So Pitino and Julius Erving played together.
Well, is Pitino, Julius got out, he was there at 68 to 71.
Pitino was on the freshman team, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, Pitino seemed like be quite a bit younger than Julius, but had he been known in high school, he wouldn't have gone to UMass. Who knows?
No, he would have had offers from everybody.
Yeah, probably would have gone to Michigan, UCLA, somebody like that. Maryland, when Lefty was there
The
then.
toughest high school player you ever played against, Gary?
The best player?
Yeah, the toughest or best, whatever.
Well, the toughest was a guy named Ron Thomas at U of L. He was strong as an ox. He's only 6'5", but he rebounded, and he didn't jump that well, but he had, like Unsel, could get great position, and you weren't going to move him out, and he was good. A lot of people haven't heard of him, but he played for Denny Crum and had a very good career.
I've heard of him. Yeah, he was quite a fine player. I think at Thomas Jefferson High School, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, he went to TJ. You're exactly right. Between the two of us, we know most of that stuff. And,
put our brains together.
And then, oh gosh, well at Louisville, they also had a guard that played in the NBA for a number of years. Played for Milwaukee.
Junior Bridge.
Jim Price.
Oh, Jim Price.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. And we the first game of one of our seasons, we played Louisville at our home, and we beat them, which was quite shocking to a lot of folks. And then we went on to have like a 14 and 16 year, but we did beat Louisville at our gym, and they were loaded. Denny was just getting it going, of course. I think he'd just been there a year at Louisville. And we beat U of L at home.
That's a pretty good win. Yeah, Jim Price was from Indianapolis. He was a high school All-American from Arsenal Tech or somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was well known to those of us who follow recruiting. He was pretty well known.
Oh yeah.
He Purdue didn't get him. Purdue's my alma mater, so I have some. I look back on Indiana high school recruiting pretty often, see who Purdue got and who they did, and all that sort of stuff. So it was those were fun times. It was just I longed for those 1960s. UK games, they weren't on TV, so you had to listen on WHAS.
Yep.
And it was either Claude Sullivan early on or Kaywood Ledford later on.
Yep.
And I mean, I would, and in our house in Fort Mitchell, you couldn't get WHAS everywhere in the house. Best place to get it was in the upstairs bathroom. So I would take my transistor radio and sit on the toilet, I'm with the lid down and all that, just to sit there and listen,
mm-hmm.
and put that up in the window and listen to Kaywood.
Yeah, when I was in Gainesville, the final game usually came down in Kentucky or Tennessee to go to the tournament.
Yeah.
And I would drive around and find a place, could hear the game barely, through, it wasn't through WHS, but the big Clear Channel station out of Cincinnati. And then it would fade out. I'd drive somewhere else. And of course, Florida and Gainesville in particular has no hills. So you're pretty level wherever you're going to be. And
I have a story just about like that. In 1992, I was in Baltimore, Maryland on a business trip the night of the Duke versus UK game.
Oh, boy.
I was driving around the hills of Maryland trying to keep my signal, and I kept losing the WHAS signal. And I was listening, and then it got into overtime, and just near the last, I lost the signal until the game. When I finally got it back, the game was over, and it was Kaywood summarizing. So you're not the first UK fan to drive around looking for a radio signal.
No, and when I moved to Atlanta, I quickly became friends with a guy that was CEO of Racetrack. He was from Louisville. His mother actually taught the Unsels at Seneca High School, and huge UK fan. So that's when Alabama was getting good. They had the big center and so forth. And on a Saturday afternoon, a very big game. So he went over, invited me to go over his conference room at work, called his dad to put the phone by the receiver by the radio, and we listened to the game in a conference room. I hate to think what it cost, but he signed off on all the expenses, so he wasn't worried about it. But,
I wonder these days whether UK fans take it like we as seriously or as, fervently as we did back in those days. I mean, I would do anything and everything to listen to the UK game. And when on the rare occasion it was on TV, I would sit right in front of the TV and not do anything else.
Yeah.
Not eat, not go to the bathroom, not anything except watch the game straight through.
Of course, those were days before the VCR, so you watched it live or you didn't watch it.
That's correct. Yeah.
A lot of Kentuckians. What's the recruiting thing? Joe was flying back, I don't know if with the team or he went up to recruit a guy, and the guy was in the plane with him, and got to Kentucky, and Joe said, now look at all those lights. It's 1:30 in the morning. All those lights down there. Those are people who are listening to Kentucky basketball games. Yeah. And he was right.
I have heard that story. Yeah, I think UK happened to be playing on the West Coast or something like that. It was late at night. And lights in eastern Kentucky were just lit up.
Yep. Yeah, they've always been great fans up there. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be on TV now, but to watch the scrimmage on Friday night to see how loud they are and so forth. And they're having a kind of event before the game, I think, where players are signing autographs. And so that'll perk them up there. They certainly need something to get them back a little bit on a happy spot after the big flood over there, up there, and all the houses that were washed away and so forth. And it's in Pikeville, I guess that's right in the center of eastern Kentucky. I'm more familiar with Prestonsburg and Floyd County, but in Pikeville, I don't forget, it's in Pike County maybe. But anyway, that'll be a good event up there. And as I mentioned earlier, great for I think the players, one of them put that idea in Calipari's head, and they did it. They would have I don't know how many people at Rupp Arena, but probably had 13,000, 14,000, and they're going up there to and that blue-white scrimmage is not to make money for UK. I think they give it away or don't charge much had it been in Lexington, but and the money up there, again, will go to the flood relief fund up there. So Kentuckians take care of each other.
They do. I've been to Pikeville, and those people are the salt of the earth, Gary.
Yeah,
Hillsboro's the same way, and I actually have there's a small town called Grays, Kentucky, right outside of Corbin on 25E, which is where my family ancestors settled when they came over from Scotland. So I have a town in eastern Kentucky named after my family.
Oh.
So eastern Kentucky holds a special place in my heart, and in particular Pikeville, because they were a big rival for Beechwood High.
Yep.
Those are just as good a people as you'll find. Life has been hard for them before these floods.
Yeah.
Harder with the floods.
Coal mining basically disappeared and so forth. Yeah, I'm with you. I've got a ton. My mother is from up there, and a ton of relatives. She went to Wheelwright High School, which produced a Kentucky player in '66, Alvin something. He lasted a year or two, and a lot of mountain guys that came down to UK to play, I think, got homesick and weren't used to stern coaching of Adolph. And there's been some exceptions. Johnny Cox from Hazard and a few of those, but many of them have come back home pretty quickly.
Yeah, Jimmy Rose from Wheelwright in 1962.
Yes, yeah. Went to Georgia Southern.
Yeah. He started at UK as a freshman, and I think he had some academic issues at the UK and went somewhere else. But he played on the freshman team in 62, 63.
I remember that now.
Conley and Cron and Mickey Gibson, the Cats were kids as they were known.
Yeah, Cats and Jay. Yes, sir. I remember that. You mentioned had some grade problems. You never hear of that anymore. When's the last time you heard a Kentucky player couldn't play the second part of the season because they didn't make their grades of the first semester?
It just doesn't happen. And back in those days, if you didn't have at least one or two, something was funny.
Yeah.
Often you had 3 or 4 didn't make it. 62, 63, they had 7 boys on scholarship. 4 of them didn't make grades, and they had to cancel the second half of the season.
I don't remember that. Well, now I think every school has the no-fail classes, where if you failed it, you just take it again. And North Carolina had that a number of years ago. I think some Kentucky fans thought that was cheating, but I can tell you at Florida when I left, they had put that class in there to get football players, I think primarily, but maybe basketball players through. And nice to have a no-fail class to pick up 2 or 3 hours. And that's probably one of the reasons you don't hear that anymore. And of course, the tutoring has gotten much better and so forth. And
well, as you played Division I basketball, so it's really hard to play sports, practice sports, go to class, and study. I mean, you don't have time for anything else but to eat and go to the bathroom.
No, you're right. You're right. I slacked off, no question, on the studying part of that. But it is hard. But yet, you look at the teams, Kentucky's got a lot of doctors out there, and they managed, and so it can be done. And
be done. You got to devote yourself to a schedule and so forth, but it's not easy. It's not.
Yeah.
And you're right. Back in the 50s and 60s, players routinely were academically ineligible for the second semester.
Yep.
It doesn't happen anymore, as far as I know.
Yep. I think athletes in general are more disciplined than the regular student because they've had to be all through their career and practice at a certain time and so forth. So that may be part of it. And but there's been some guy, Cliff Berger. It was an extremely successful oral surgeon down in Savannah. I think he's since moved back to Lexington. But there have been a lot of guys that have been doctors and so forth. Larry Lentz.
Another one.
What's that?
Bob Guyette is another.
Yes,
dentist.
he's an oral surgeon too. Same thing. Yeah. And Larry Lentz, who didn't play at all, but he was there with, I guess, with Nash. He's 6'8" guy. He became a pharmacist because he used to intern at the one up the street from us. And so anyway, that's interesting to know. Athletes, many of them are successful off the court as well as on the court.
Yeah. Well, I've probably run you past the time, so.
Well, I don't know we got a time, but it's been great chatting with you, and hopefully the listeners out there enjoyed it too. And I think you and I had a good time anyway. And
definitely two of us did.
Yeah, that's right. That's
I can
right.
talk all day and all night about Kentucky basketball.
Well, I know, and when I have a question, you know who sends you an email. It's me. And we'll have you back on again, I'm sure.
Sometimes I have to look it up, but I usually answer. It's just one of my lifelong passions is Kentucky basketball. And you got to credit Adolph Rupp for that.
Yeah.
Without Adolph, none of us would have that passion.
Yeah. Well, you gave me credit. You were talking about you were a Cincinnati fan until we met each other?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I would not have been a Kentucky recruiting nut until you and I talked that it was the summer of 1967. Your dad, mom, and you were visiting with the Eubanks, and we got to chat. I think we played golf at Fort Mitchell Country Club.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Definitely piqued my interest on UK recruiting and recruiting in general. You put me in the fast lane in terms of that because you knew all the backstories that I didn't know. I knew that UK was recruiting this guy or Cincinnati was recruiting that guy, and you knew where they were likely to go. You and I talked about John Fraley and Parker and Hollenbeck. You knew that where they were going and all that kind of stuff. So you had the backstory, you definitely put my recruiting interest into the fast lane, and it's something that stayed with me for almost 60 years.
Yeah. Fraley was from Middletown, where Jerry Lucas was from.
Yeah.
Small world at that. Well, Tom, thank you for joining us. It's whenever I talk to you, it's always a pleasure and always fun, and time flies. But appreciate your taking the time this afternoon.
My pleasure. If occasion calls, I'm happy to do it again sometime.
Okay. Before we leave, I'm going to get the email address for people to write, or if we missed something, which I doubt if we did, but if we missed something today, feel free to correct us. And the email address is chatwildcats, plural, at gmail.com. Chatwildcats@gmail.com, and hope you'll write us.
Thank you for listening to Kentucky Basketball Then and Now. Mixed by soundsational audio expert Daniel Dottridge of Atlanta Podcast Recording with web hosting by Buzzsprout. On behalf of hosts Gary Waddell and Mike Harreld, go Big Blue.